Okay? So are liberal Jews. Well, my friends, which
Welcome to the Political Power Hour with your host, former congressional candidate, retired federal agent, and three-time author, Michael Vilardi, highlighting today's political hot topics with the most interesting political candidates in the 2022 election. The most hard-hitting political commentary on the air today. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Political Power Hour. I'm your host, Mike Vilardi. I have another fantastic show. We are only 2 weeks out from election night, and I'm here with Dan Francise, who's running for Congress, and we're going to have another great show. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back, Mike. Great to be here.
You're welcome. I'm so proud of him because he's doing a tremendous job as a candidate, and he needs to be the next congressperson in CD 22. And I want to sit here and tell you why. Just recently, a client of mine, an elderly Jewish lady, lost her husband, and her husband happened to be a friend of mine. And when she lost her husband, when she got back from the funeral, she got a letter from Social Security. They're stopping all the Social Security payments. And what made matters worse is a month later, the government came in and wanted the money back from the pension that they had overpaid him because he died at the end of the month, and they paid him for the next month and took back all that money, leaving this poor woman with nothing. Now, I was advocating for a Social Security benefit to the spouse. And I think, Dan, you would agree with me that would be a good idea to help our elderly people.
Yes, sir.
Okay? And Lois Frankel has done nothing, I mean zero, for these elderly people in this district. And we have a lot of them. And I got to tell everybody that what happened to this particular woman should not happen to anybody else, because it's criminal to leave a 79-year-old woman without money to pay her bills and to buy food. And I know, Dan, you're never going to let that happen to any of the women here in Palm Beach. I know you won't, because I know you.
That's right, Mike.
Okay? And I got to tell you, all Lois Frankel could talk about is abortion. And the reason she could only talk about abortion is because she's done nothing for nobody in this district. And I'm just outraged by what happened to this particular client and friend of mine. I mean, I knew her husband since 1989 when we worked together, and it was just criminal to watch somebody who's that old be treated that way by our government.
So, Mike, the federal government has let down our seniors in a big way in so many ways. I'll tell you another one before I touch on that one. Mm-hmm. Did you know over the last year, 1 million senior citizens in this country fell below the poverty line? It's not because they did anything wrong, it's because of inflation.
Yes.
All these inflationary policies that we're getting with this government that Lois Frankel has supported 100% has driven 1 million of our seniors below the poverty line. So let me talk about this particular case in Social Security, because Social Security comes up quite a bit.
Yes.
Let me tell you my own personal story. I'm 60. Okay. I've been paying into it for 44 years, since my first job as a 16-year-old. I've paid in so much money, and you know what? I want it back.
Of course.
Everybody who's paid in all these years wants it back. The government has to give it back because that's the expectation. The government has to honor its obligations. And in this particular case, there should be a survivor benefit that,
yes.
that the surviving spouse should have, because frankly, that's the way pension funds work. You know, people look to it as a way for retirement income. And there should definitely be some sort of survivor benefit like that. So it's terrible that this lady got, lost it.
And that's what I was advocating when I ran for Congress 2 years ago. At least an 18-month benefit, because we know some guys like Tony Randall, right, 84 years old, marries a 42-year-old, right, and then she'd get it for the rest of her life. But at least give them some time, a couple of years. It wouldn't bankrupt the system. I mean, if we go back and look at Social Security, it was August 14th, 1935, that FDR signed the Social Security Act. And you know, there were 3 provisions in that act that when he signed it that made it into law that have since been changed by the Democratic Party. The first and the foremost was that there'd be a separate trust fund set up for Social Security so it couldn't be raided by the government. And guess what? LBJ comes into office and says, you know what, we as politicians need more money to play with, and they changed that. And then what happens? The second thing was that under no circumstance, and this was the original law that was signed on August 14th, 1935, that if they take Social Security tax from you, that you can't pay federal income tax on top of that. So what happens now, right? So back then, if you made $100,000, which costs a lot of money, well, let's say you made $10,000, right? But you paid $1,000 in Social Security taxes, right? You would only pay federal income tax on the $9,000 that was left. What happens today? You make $100,000, you pay $10,000 into the system, Medicare tax, Social Security tax, right? And they tax you on the $100,000. But you didn't get $100,000. You got 90 because the government took 10 from you. You never saw the 10. So now you're paying federal tax on 10,000 you never had control over, you never saw, and under the original law, it was illegal to do that.
It's crazy how that's developed, Mike. I mean, the government's giving you money and then taxing you on it right back. I mean, doesn't that sound kind of ridiculous?
What's wrong? It's double taxation.
It's just ridiculous to give you money that they're going to tax and take back from you. That's
right.
That's an inefficiency, and just the whole thing is ridiculous, Mike. I couldn't agree with you more.
Exactly. And here's what makes it worse. Al Gore was the tying vote when Clinton was president. It used to be under FDR, when you received Social Security, you received it tax-free.
Mm-hmm.
That means whatever you got, it was yours. You didn't pay taxes on it. Isn't that how it should be when you're 85 years old?
I totally agree. I don't understand how that ever became the law. And here's another thing that's happening because of inflation. There are going to be increases in Social Security. Stop me if you're going to talk about this. I don't want to steal your thunder. But they are. So good news is Social Security benefits are going to go up with inflation. However, the tax brackets are staying the same. So a lot of people are now being moved up into higher brackets. I remember years ago I remember the last round of big-time inflation in this country 40 years ago. The term they used then was bracket creep.
Yeah, exactly
Because, you're no really better off, but now you're in a higher tax bracket simply because of inflation.
Right.
Those tax brackets have to be adjusted up. It's unfair otherwise.
No, you're 100% right about that. But what I find criminal is if you're on Social Security and you make money, any kind of money, you have a part-time job, whatever it is, they can tax your benefit. 85% of your Social Security gets taxed. Well, that is, first of all, against the original intent of the law. When they passed it that would never happen, and they changed it. And people are senior citizens, the most vulnerable among us. I mean, when you're 90 years old, what are you going to do? You're going to get a part-time job? And if you have, money coming in from a pension or something else, they're going to tax you at Social Security 85% that you paid into for 50 years, 60 years. It's absolutely wrong. It needs to be changed. And Lois Franco, not one time in all the years she's been in office, has ever stood up for this, ever stood up for our elderly, ever tried to get this passed, ever protected. And we're here in Palm Beach County. There's a lot of elderly people. She's done nothing on this issue, absolutely nothing, which is why the only edge she could run against you is that you like Trump and you're against you're against abortion.
Okay.
Okay? Go ahead.
I'd definitely like to address that, but before that, you're right. She's done very little in Congress.
Yeah.
Can you name any legislation she was behind? You ask people that, and they say no, they can't. In fact, last year she did a proxy vote 150 times, meaning she didn't even show up to vote.
Right.
She just gave her voting card to somebody else. I mean, would you hire somebody that wasn't showing up to work at least a third to half of the time? And I tell people, no. And so why should we rehire her? So she's been running these ads against me that are 100% dishonest. But the reason she keeps shifting the topic to abortion is because she has nothing else to show for her time in Congress. Everything they've done the last couple of years has all failed. They failed us on the economy. They failed us on the border. They failed us on crime. They failed us on drugs. That's why she wants to very quickly switch the topic from that because she has nothing but failed policies to answer for. She always wants to switch the topic to abortion. The amazing thing there is it's a settled law here in Florida.
Exactly.
There's a very common misconception that everyone watching needs to help us dispel, There's this view that the repeal of Roe v. Wade made abortion illegal in this country.
Right.
That's a lie that the left is pushing. Everyone watching this has to keep pounding away at everyone they know to tell them that's not true. It did not make it illegal. It just moved the decision back to the states like it should be. In this particular state, abortion is settled law. So not a single thing changed in this state when Roe v. Wade was repealed.
Right.
And yet she keeps pivoting every conversation to something that's settled law where nothing has changed, nothing will change, but then she avoids discussing all these areas where our country is in crisis. I mean, economics, I could talk about that one for an hour. The border, same thing. Let me talk about the border.
Yes.
In addition to the 4 million people that are coming across and where they're going to go, by the way, there's a lot of bad stuff coming across too. Did you know that Florida has now become one of the top states for human trafficking? And it's coming from all around the world, but a lot of it's coming across the southern border. Here's another one. 300 Americans per day are dying of fentanyl overdoses.
Right.
That's coming across the southern border by the truckload. That's a drug most people I know never heard of 5 years ago.
Right.
It has become the biggest killer of young people in this country. These are solvable problems. These problems are man-made, and they can be fixed by sealing that border and having better law enforcement. And on the economy, same thing. Everyone says, "Oh my God, how did we get this inflation?" Well, I predicted it a year and a half ago, not because I'm a genius, but because a lot of people were predicting. It was pretty obvious it would happen. So these are all things that they've completely fouled up our country, and that's why they always shift the topic to something that's a settled law. So I say she, once again, is failing our country by not talking about the things where immediate action can have immediate impact. That keeps changing to that. So if I may talk about what's in her commercials,
Of course.
she says, "I advocate a national abortion ban." That is
Right.
100% false, Mike.
Right.
You know me, you know I'm a strict
do.
constitutionalist.
You are,
I would always vote against any kind of national law on abortion, whether pro or con.
Right.
And if you read in the mailing pieces she sent out, they're an absolute disgrace. She says, not only do I advocate that, she goes on and on and on about how women are going to die because of me. Oh, it's going to disproportionately affect women of color. I could show it to you, her mail piece. It is incredible how she goes on. And the little footnote says, footnotes my website. So this morning I was talking to a reporter, and they said, he asked her, so where do you see this on Dan's website? Oh, well, it was there before he scrubbed it. Well, that is an outright lie.
Wow.
It was never there. And I told him, you go back to her and say, show me the screenshots of what my website looked like before I scrubbed it. And the answer, you won't get them because the answer, it was never there. So she is running a campaign that hinges on one topic, abortion only.
Right.
And on top of that, it's all built on lies about my position.
Absolutely.
Again, I can't emphasize it enough.
Right.
I will not vote for an national abortion ban.
Right.
There may be some pro-lifers who don't like that, but my answer is, I'm a constitutionalist. It should be decided by the states, and each individual state should decide it.
And I agree with you. It should be settled in the states. And so it becomes a state's issue, which means it has nothing to do with running for Congress. What really affects you in Congress is how you're going to spend our tax money.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do for your people?
Mm-hmm.
Like we just spoke about on the Social Security issue. The other thing I'm a big advocate of is term limits, because you see these people like her who get in, they have a ton of money, they're able to use federal funding to get campaign literature out because they are the sitting congressperson. So as a result, the re-election rate is over 90% because they have the name recognition already. They have the ability to send out mailings, and the government's paying for it, puts you at a distinct disadvantage. And they have money from people who they've already, who've already contributed and built up a war chest.
Although, something interesting about Lois Frankel, I've never once gotten a constituent piece of mail from her. Do you ever get anything from her in the mail?
Only in election years, a couple of months before the election.
Right. So she has the budget to write out, send stuff to you every quarter to tell you what's going on.
Right.
But no. But she has plenty of budget in her campaign to send out all these lies. So she's yet another politician who views us all as nuisances they have to deal with every couple of years, and then they go back to their cozy place in Washington.
Well, I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to predict that you are going to win this race because you're the right guy at the right time. She's done nothing. the fact that she can only run on an issue like abortion, which is settled law and is ridiculous, has nothing to do with her job. And you're talking about things that matter, things that are going to put money in people's pockets, to curb the inflation, to return to the people stuff. I mean, like you said, before, these elderly people who, the rent increases, rent went up by 40% in Palm Beach County. This is all based on Biden inflation. Okay? And I am sure that you're not going to go begging Saudi Arabia for oil. But you might talk to Exxon about drilling more in Texas or Alaska.
Well, exactly, Mike, exactly. Thank you for your prediction. I'll tell you another reason why I think I'm going to pull this off. More than a month ago, we did some polling. Before I'd done any campaigning or any TV ads, we were already within striking distance. Last week, she suddenly went from silent to full-out attack on me, naming me in her ads. That's a clear sign when a candidate knows they're in trouble. So she's running scared. She sees the same thing that we're seeing, that this race is up for grabs, and that she's vulnerable. And she also knows, you know, she's vulnerable because of all of her failed policies. There is no record to answer for, and that's why she keeps changing the topic.
Do you know how much money she spent in TV advertising 2 years ago when she ran against Loomer?
I don't think she spent anything on TV.
Zero.
Right.
You know why?
Because she was up against a weaker candidate.
Exactly.
And in all fairness, this is a red wave year that I think is much more favorable to Republicans than 2 years ago. I remember someone telling me, so on election night last year, someone went up to Lois Frank and said, well, what do you have to say about your former opponent? And her answer was, who?
Right.
All right, she's not saying who. She's saying my name
Exactly.
all over. But you know what? I'd like to publicly say a nice big thank you to Lois Frankel for spending millions of dollars on helping my name recognition.
Right.
It's helping me in a big way. Now all of a sudden, wherever I go, people say, "Are you Dan? Are you Dan?"
Right.
Seriously, Mike,
That's
it's
right.
happening.
Right.
She has made me the most well-known Republican.
Right.
So again, I'm looking to Lois Frankel. If you're watching, thank you for the millions of dollars of free name recognition. And it's helping me a lot, actually.
Yeah, I think
and she
it
puts
is.
good pictures of me in her ads, too.
She does, absolutely.
Thank you.
I do
Thank you
like the
again.
pictures.
Yeah.
You're great in her ads. And you know what's funny? Is everything she's saying about you, I mean, the fact that you like Trump, you're endorsed by Giuliani, they're not big negatives.
Well,
They're really not.
No,
I mean,
for a lot of people,
I-
like today I was asked about, someone else asked me about, another reporter asked me about Giuliani, and the answer is, I was proud to have his endorsement.
Of course.
He took a hold of the city that people said was broken and couldn't be fixed,
Right.
and he fixed it. He did it by being relentless, never taking no for an answer, hard work, exactly my kind of guy.
Yep, exactly right.
So I was proud to have that endorsement. Very interesting guy who accomplished what people said couldn't be accomplished.
And he's a results guy. New York City needs him back
Oh,
because let me tell you, it's a nightmare there. The governor of New York just said that the crime is in people's imaginations.
I just read this morning there have been 9 murders on the subway this year.
Yeah.
That got down to 0 for a long time.
Absolutely right.
And
Absolutely right.
that's what happens when you have this soft on crime, no bail
Exactly.
kind of thing. I think so long as if you can take a shot at somebody, I think if you don't hit them, you're back out on the street that afternoon.
You are.
And that's not just New York. Other cities are like that too.
Yeah. The other
Thankfully, we
liberal,
live in a law and
Right.
order state.
Right.
Thankfully,
right. But those are other liberal cities.
Correct.
You're talking about Los Angeles. You're talking about Chicago, Illinois,
And Washington D.C.
Washington, D.C. I mean, but New York has, because it was such a safe place. I mean, even when Michael Bloomberg. Bloomberg, right? Bloomberg took over. He kept Giuliani's policies in place.
Yeah, he was smart enough to see this was working, and in fact, he even took it another step. So, and that's what mayors all over the country have to learn from. And the scary thing we saw there, I mean, we see this in other places like Venezuela, just how fast bad leaders can destroy a city or destroy a
Exactly.
country. Do you know Venezuela into the 1990s was the wealthiest country in Latin
Yes.
America?
Right.
Look how fast they destroyed it. And why do they want to do that? Because you know what? The elite still become fabulously wealthy in those kind of countries.
Right.
That's why they like to see that stuff happen. Same thing in New York. Very quickly, the new mayor there, he's gone already, but within a couple of years, de Blasio destroyed that city.
He destroyed
and
the
we
city.
see it in Illinois, we see it in Chicago and Washington, D.C.
Right. Well, it's time for a commercial. We will be back with Dan Francise in a matter of minutes. Thank you for watching.
Those massive tax and reckless spending policies are killing us with inflation and higher costs. That's why Frank
I can help. My company, Winning Tax Solutions, has always gotten our
Email us at mikevilardi@gmail.com. That's Vilardi with one L. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to the show. We're back with Dan. Dan, it's always a pleasure to have you on. And
Thank you,
welcome
Mike.
back. Tell us about what you were going to do for your constituents when you get to Congress, and I believe you will get to Congress.
Mike, I have many priorities, but for sure, when I talk to voters, the thing they most of all want me to tackle is to fix the economy, get us out of the recession, and fix inflation. And as I've looked back, I say, you know how you cure inflation? Stop the dumb things that gave it to us.
Exactly.
And one of the dumb things was massive amounts of deficit spending.
Yes, that's
which,
true.
Which a year and a half ago, many people saw it coming. It wasn't just me.
Right, exactly.
And so we need to get back toward balanced budgets. And in fact, I would support a balanced budget amendment. I think the time has come
Yes,
for that.
I
So
think
that's
you're
one
right.
part of it. Another thing that's hurt the economy was paying millions of people to stay at home and not work. That's actually had a profound impact on the willingness to work in our country, and that affects wages and affects ability to hire, and that works its way back to all of us. So we must never again do anything like that. And yes, we need to deregulate the energy industry. Biden has shut down, almost completely shut down all new permits in this country.
Right.
And we had, 2 years ago, we had energy independence. We don't have that anymore. And that's important on two levels. Number one, national security. If we are a net producer of oil, you don't have the President of the United States going off to Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and begging them to pump oil to keep prices low here. If we have our own oil, we can get ourselves back to $2 per gallon.
Now,
And the Federal Reserve is another thing that I think that's become politicized, that it needs a complete makeover. So these are all things I would tackle right away on the economic side.
well, I'm just going to ask you one question, and maybe I'm a little slow when it comes to this, but how does not drilling in America and buying oil from Saudi Arabia save the environment? What's the difference?
It doesn't.
It doesn't?
It doesn't at all. I mean, it's oil being when all is said and done, the oil gets consumed here, and to the extent it pollutes it pollutes the same. They're just trying to condition us to getting away from it.
Right.
It's foolish. It's a shell game.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but American oil companies have the best technology, the cleanest drilling. I mean, you're using the best technology, the cleanest. So what you're doing is you're leaving less of a carbon footprint than more when you go to Venezuela or Saudi Arabia or somebody else to get your oil.
We are by far the cleanest major country when it
Right.
comes to oil, for example. But also, we also have the lowest cost energy in this country.
Yes.
And when I used to talk to people who lived all around the world, they would always say enviously, you guys have the lowest energy and cost in the world. That's one of the things that makes your country great economic power.
Absolutely.
And they would say it so enviously, like, hey, you cheated. And I said, well, no, we have it. Why shouldn't we use it? Mike, we gave that away.
Yes.
That was a tremendous advantage we had in world economic affairs. We gave it away. So there's just so many reasons I'm so unhappy about it. By the way, in my former day job, I spent 20 years representing clients, in the energy industry. So I know a few things about oil and gas. And I could tell you what they're doing right now, it just makes absolutely no sense. I mean, they want to get us moved over to electric vehicles.
Right.
That's one of the reasons they want gas prices to go up high. But you know what? We don't have the electric grid for it. I think we only have 1/3 of the electricity we would need
Right.
if we were to go to all electric. But here's a theoretical for you, Mike. Let's say you had a hurricane and the power went out for 5 days. How do you charge your electric car?
You're in trouble.
So
Absolutely
Florida, you'd be in huge trouble, right? Let's say you lived in Tampa and you had an electric car and your power didn't come on for 3 weeks. So look, you can't get me. You can't get me fired up any more on this stuff than I am, because I'm just absolutely crazy about it. This is stuff I want to tackle when I go to Washington.
Well, how about what happened in California? They were telling them you can't charge your car because we don't have the power for it.
This was predicted 20 years ago, that there was a day they wouldn't have enough electricity in California, yet they wouldn't let them build more power plants or new
Right.
power lines coming in. It was predicted. So none of this makes sense. It's very poor plan. I'll be generous. I'll say it was poor planning. That's the nicest spin you can put on it.
Absolutely. Well, Newsom is now bragging that with all the people leaving California, there'll be enough energy for those that are left behind.
Well, that's a great outcome,
Isn't that
isn't
a
it?
great
And that guy wants to be president. He wants to
Right.
take all of his everything he's learned from being governor of that state, how he's driven that state into the ground. That used to be one of the best states in the country,
Absolutely.
the best schools, the best roads, the best business climate, the best everything. Look how bad, like I was talking before, look how quickly bad leadership has destroyed that state. And that guy thinks he's going to be president someday.
Well, you know, Ronald Reagan was the governor, and he did become president, but he did a great job with that state.
Yes.
And he was a great president. And Newsom, I don't know how he won the recall election, in all honesty.
He's connected. You know, he's Pelosi's nephew.
I
don't know if you knew that.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. That's why the dead people always come out and vote for them.
I guess
It's
so.
amazing. But amazing to see. Okay, so let's go back to your other issues you want to touch on tonight. You want to talk about as Congressperson. What would you do?
So we talked about the economic ones, balance the budget and so forth. We need to start looking for cutting expenses, because people ask me, okay, Dan, you believe in a balanced budget amendment, how would you do that?
Right.
And the answer is, we're not going to get it balanced anytime soon. It could take 5 to 10 years, because we are every year at a $1 trillion deficit. If you tried to cut that off, all of a sudden you'd throw the country immediately into a recession. So unfortunately, we're stuck with those for at least another 5 to 10 years. But I have a couple of ideas on how to start getting us there. First of all, a federal hiring freeze. Right off the bat, that'll start solving the problem 3 to 4% per year.
Right.
But we also need to take a look at different agencies that we can shut down.
Right.
One of the favorite ones for me to start with, the Department of Education.
That's what I was thinking.
So the DOE, Department of Education was founded in 1979, and I think as I look back, that will be Jimmy Carter's most lasting bad legacy to our country.
Right.
Because I asked people, all right, in 1979 our country had been around for about 200 years. How do we function with about a Department of Education for 200 years?
Issue,
the answer is we had some of the best schools in the world.
Exactly.
How have we done since then? Our national reading scores and math scores have actually fallen relative to the rest of the country.
Right.
That's about $100 billion a year being spent on something that I think is getting us worse results than what we had before. So that's an example right off the top.
I agree with you 100%.
But all these other federal agencies really need a zero-based approach. All too often, the way these agencies look at their annual budgets is to say, all right, I spent $100 billion last year, by how much will I increase it this year?
Right.
I would say, you spent $100 billion last year, good. Let's take a look at every single dollar and see how much of it needs to be spent again and where we can cut. That's the kind of approach I would take to it. That's heresy to the swamp, but that's what we need to do. I just think there's so much bloat. I mean, here's another example of how much bloat there is in Washington. 4 out of the 10 richest zip codes in the United States are in the suburbs around Washington. That's not because rich people are moving there, it's because your tax dollars go there.
Right.
So economics would be a big thing. Yes, I would get back to securing our border. I've always been an advocate of building the wall. And when I say build the wall, I mean more than just the physical wall. I mean back it up with the human resources and the electronic resources, and get back to legal immigration like they had when my grandparents came into this country.
Of course.
Do it legally like they did. That would be a priority.
Stay in Mexico policy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, these are some of the big ones, but also better law enforcement for drugs. I talked a minute ago about the 300 people per day dying of fentanyl.
Yes.
And I think by sealing the border, you'll do a long way toward keeping it out. But to the extent it's in this country, there needs to be better law enforcement to track that down. That's a killer. That's very bad for our country.
Did you hear what happened the other day, to a cop in Indiana?
What happened?
He was doing a pat down of a guy. He found this white, something didn't know what it was. It was fentanyl. He passed out. They had a knock on him to bring him back.
Oh, because they got into the air, into vaporized?
Yeah.
It's very deadly in small doses.
Amounts. And they brought him back, thank God. But he was just doing a pat down to find, and he saw this substance. He wasn't sure what it was. Fentanyl.
This is why so many parents are afraid of Halloween this year. They've always been afraid. Truthfully, if I had little children, I wouldn't let them go door to door for candy anymore. I would tell them to get those little Ronald McDonald boxes, collect money for children in need, then come home and I'll buy all the candy you want, just so I know it's safe. We'll have a party. We'll have a candy party at home.
There we go.
You and your friends.
There we go.
Because there's just too many bad people out there that want to hurt us, and that stuff is very easy to slip in, even if it's accidental.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter. If your kid gets it, they're dead. Apparently, a lot of it's being smuggled in Skittles. And if if somehow that got mixed in, even if it's accidentally, it doesn't matter if it's accidental or not, your kid's getting poisoned by fentanyl.
Right, exactly.
So that's that's another priority. I mean, there's so many things I'd like to fix.
Now, Joe Biden just recently passed a law. It's called the Inflation Reduction Act, which of course is a joke. It's to hire 87,000 new IRS agents with the goal to collect more money from you, the American people. Now, the IRS has already adjusted policies to do just that. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but because I work with them every day, I'm seeing it firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally think it's just wrong. It's criminal. I mean, they deals that they would make with 25-year-old kids who are unemployed, they want to wait out the statute and try to collect every dime they possibly can from these people, because now the goal is to use the IRS as a tool to purposely raise more money so they could pay those 87,000 new salaries and bring in more money to pay for new legislation and more federal spending. What is your take on that law, and would you, as a congressperson, fund it or defund it?
I would absolutely defund it, or if you really want to hire more people, maybe put them into Border Patrol or law enforcement instead of the IRS. Here's another thing. They're going to be heavily armed. It's almost like a small army you're creating, and why do they need to be so heavily armed?
Okay, well, I'm gonna explain that a little, because I was a criminal investigator for the IRS, so I was one of those armed IRS agents for 22 years. Okay.
Well, you I trust.
Yes, well, thank you, but only a portion of them are going to be additional special agents, probably about 2,000. But what happens is the IRS has a terrible, terrible reputation with the public. Okay, they're not well liked. All right, imagine an IRS agent shooting somebody on the street. That's a bad shoot. What would that do to the IRS?
Oh, it would hurt their reputation like it happens all the time.
It would destroy their reputation. So what the IRS does is they give their agents more firearms training than any other agency. So if you're a cop, you might go once or twice to the range. If you're an IRS agent, you go 4 times.
Okay, well, that's good.
Which is good. Twice to qualify, once for judgment pistol shooting. So they have what's called a FATS machine. You go into this room and they put it on the screen and they give you a gun that's like your gun, and they put you in shoot, don't shoot situations. And if you shoot the wrong person once, you lose your gun.
Wow.
You have to have 100% judgment, because they don't want anybody on the street that's going to screw up, which is why you haven't heard of an IRS shooting.
Well, you know what? This shows the benefits of good training.
Right, exactly.
And people always say, what should we do with law enforcement? Disarm them? No. I think there's there's no substitute for good training.
Exactly. And the fourth time you go is simunitions training. Now, simunitions is, the paintballs. Okay, so when you go to arrest the guy, he reaches for a gun, shoots at you, and you shoot back, and so puts you in that live type fire where you get used to make sure you take cover real good, because if you don't, you're going to get hit, and even though you have the padding and stuff, you feel it if you were to get hit, you would feel that. So as a result, one of the things about IRS especially is to get the best possible firearms training, so there isn't an incident where an IRS agent shoots somebody in the street where they shouldn't.
All right, so you're making me feel better about this. Having said that, why do we need all these agents?
We don't. We absolutely don't.
We don't. And there's a worry that there's going to be abuses, and this is going to turn into an arm of the government that's out to harass us, as opposed to just be law enforcement. So no, I would not support this.
No, and I don't blame you. I wouldn't support it either, even though it's going to help my business. But the problem with it is they're going to go looking for revenue. And when they start looking, they're gonna start targeting different industries. They'll start with the real estate agents. They'll start with waiters, bartenders, anybody that might be receiving cash, or they're gonna start targeting those businesses. What is that gonna do to the economy? And then they have to cover their cost. So they're gonna find something. You can guarantee they're gonna come look, and they're gonna find something, and they're gonna want interest. They're gonna want penalties, and if nothing else, if you're the average taxpayer, to go through an audit and fight with them, you have very little chance.
Oh, I know.
So you have to hire a professional to represent you, and that gets costly too.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, I've always been in favor of tax simplification.
Absolutely.
I mean, we all know how long it takes to fill out your taxes. I mean, by the time I'm done, even though I have a very simple return, very simple life, it's a stack, 180 pages thick. So I'm in favor of simplification,
Yeah.
of lowering the rates, getting back
Yes.
to fewer tax brackets,
Yes,
and,
I agree with you.
and dramatically reducing the reductions, the deductions rather. And a lot of people say, oh, well, you know, we want to help this industry or help that industry. And I say, you know what? If the federal government wants to help an industry, then pass a bill and give it money so it's out in the open how we're helping them, and that way you can have an open debate about it and people can see out in the open how that industry is being helped. If you do it via the tax code, it's pretty much by stealth. No one really knows how much help is being given, and it kind of stays off the radar, which is bad. People should know exactly what industries are being helped and how much is being given to them.
And that's why the tax code's this big.
Yes.
Because
30,000 pages, right?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's six
Have you read
times
it all?
the size. Not all. No, I missed 2 pages.
Yeah.
But that was a couple of years ago. But here's the bottom line: the people that are supporting the politicians, they support them so that they get favorable tax treatment. So, and that's a problem, and that's why we need term limits. We need to keep politicians honest. We should not have somebody in Congress for 30 years.
No.
We shouldn't have somebody in the Senate for 30 years. And so it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. It doesn't matter if it's a Mitch McConnell or a Nancy Pelosi. Both those people should have retired a long, long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, people often say to me, oh, but if you had term limits, you never would have had a Gerald Ford or some of the other people that were good. And I say, you know what? For every one of those, you get 40 or 50 bad ones. And I think if you have term limits, you get a steady flow of people in there with new perspectives. People have been coming out from the real world and bringing
Right.
a real world perspective there. One of the things I've often said is if you want to have government by the people, you need to have people, and by the people and for the people, you need to have people in there running it, not career politicians. This is
Absolutely.
why early on I signed the term limit pledge.
Right.
But I took it an extra step that most people don't, because the term limit pledge that I signed only says I will vote for term limits.
Right,
And,
right.
and the limit being 3 terms for a member of Congress, 6
right.
years. I've already said many times publicly, and I'm on record saying, I would not serve more than 3 years, even if it's not the law, that I have to leave.
3 terms, right?
And the reason I say this is, number one, I want to practice what I preach.
Of
If I'm going to
course,
vote
I
for it,
agree with you. Right.
number one.
Right.
But number two, that motivates me to go in there right away and try to fix things. Because a lot of people say, don't sign on for that. You need your first 2 terms to learn your way around, meet people, and so on. I say, no. I want to right away try to make things happen, because I know I'm leaving in 6 years, and then get it as far as I can and find somebody else to pick it up from there. So I'm a big believer in that. But for everything, whether it's Congress, the president, or even the HOA boards here in Florida.
No,
I'm an advocate of that, because that's how you get things to reflect the will of the people.
I agree with you, and I do the same thing. If I were to run for Congress again and I were to be elected, I'd serve 6 years, 3 terms. That would be it. For the same reason, I would support term limits, because we have to get rid of the corruption in government, and there's too much corruption. I mean, you might have heard about this, the Hunter Biden laptop.
Yep,
okay?
heard about it.
The amount of money from these are all Chinese companies that are in the gas and oil industry. Well, when oil prices go up, who does that benefit?
Yeah, them. Of course.
Them.
Not you and
so,
me.
And so you got a president who has a son who's directly benefiting from higher gas prices and oil prices. Is that a problem?
Yeah. No, I think he quite possibly is the most corrupt president in American history, and that's quite a standard. That's quite, given that you have the Clintons in there too.
Of course.
That's quite a standard to live up to.
Of course. Well, let me ask you this question then. Would you, like they did to Trump, they impeached him twice, would you vote for impeachment of Joe Biden?
For more than a year now, I've been pretty open that yes, I would. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to go about it differently, because we're a nation of laws.
Yes.
I would want to do it with hearings. I'd want to go about it very slowly and deliberately. We want government by laws, not government by lynch mob,
Of course.
like we got with the Trump impeachments.
Right.
I'm pretty confident from what I've seen that after we investigated him, we'd find that he was corrupt with everything he did with his son. I mean, people say, what would you impeach him for? I said, well, pick your reason. There's all this stuff with his son, the dereliction of duty with respect to our border, and I've heard 5 other reasons why he's impeachable.
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about that. Back to the commercial break. We'll see you in 2 minutes after the commercial. Thank you.
I'm Dan Francise, and I approve this message.
Lois Frankel's massive tax and reckless spending policies are killing us with inflation and higher costs. That's why Frankel lies and always changes the subject. Don't fall for her smokescreen. The truth? In Florida, the right to abortion is settled law. The truth? Lois Frankel and Nancy Pelosi are destroying our economy. Vote Dan Francise for Congress. Dan's a successful businessman who will get our economy and our country back on track.
Tax alert! Tax alert!
I was receiving letter after letter from the IRS.
I got Mike Vilardi on the phone and I said, Mike, I got a problem.
He took the pressure off my shoulders.
He just made me feel like I had Superman on my side.
Trust me, he's the man to go to.
IRS problems? I'm Mike Vilardi, enrolled agent. I can help. My company, Winning Tax Solutions, has always gotten our clients the best possible results. Visit us at winningtaxsolutions.com or call us today.
If your family is suffering from inflation and high costs caused by Lois Frankel's reckless policies, Republican Dan Francise is clearly your best choice for Congress. Dan is a successful businessman who understands finance and economics. He's not a politician. Dan grew up blue collar and knows how tough inflation is on working families. Dan Francise will go to Washington and fight the liberals who are killing us with inflation. Dan Francise for Congress.
I'm Dan Francise, and I approve this message.
You've been watching the Political Power Hour with Mike Vilardi. For more information, email us at mikevilardi@gmail.com. That's Vilardi with one L. And now, back to the show.
Hi, welcome back to the show. We were talking about impeachment before the break, and as you know, basically impeachment works pretty much like a criminal indictment would. Congress would have to vote by more than 50% to impeach, and then it would go to a trial in the Senate. So what they did, of course, with the Democratic Congress was they just came up with any reason to impeach Trump twice, knowing that they could never win in the Senate. Because in the Senate, you need 67 senators to convict and remove the person from office. So virtually it has never happened, for the simple reason that most politics are partisan, of course. And if it's like the Clinton impeachment, for instance, no Democratic senator was going to vote to convict Bill Clinton. And so he got impeached, but he was never convicted. And just like what happened with Trump, except for Mitt Romney, don't ask me how he turned sides, but he did, you could never get to that 67 vote limit. But in the case of Biden, where they have voice recordings of messages he left on Hunter's phone, of his own, himself talking about what he did, the quid pro quo with Ukraine, and the money going into the bank account, do you think it would be possible that he could actually be convicted?
I think he would resign before he got convicted. I think the way it would play out is like Nixon, because with Nixon there became such overwhelming evidence that he had done wrong things that enough Republicans had told him privately, if this comes up for a vote, how can I defend you? And I think that so ultimately I think that's what would happen. I bet my prediction is he would resign. But I've heard there is such rampant corruption in that family that his brothers are worth, or one of them in particular, is worth hundreds of millions of dollars because of all the deals they've done. Yes. So I think that stuff alone is a reason to impeach and convict him. But also he has not protected our southern border. And there's other stuff he's done overseas, Afghanistan. The other day I was hearing someone who was a retired military guy go on and on about how the way we left Afghanistan was a terrible dereliction.
Of course it was, absolutely.
I mean, you could pick your reason, and but we're doing it for real reasons. They in the past it was done because they just didn't like him, and they came up with trumped up charges. Pardon the pun.
No, exactly. What do you think of the fact that he was selling our strategic oil reserve to China?
It's horrible that he's even touching it. That oil reserve was designed for times of national emergency.
Right.
It was designed to give us 3 months of oil in case we got cut off in a war, for example.
Right.
And it was not designed to bail out a politician from bad policies. And so he's been running around asking Venezuela to pump more and Saudi Arabia to pump more to keep oil prices low, at least until the election.
Right.
So here we have the President of the United States manipulating oil markets. That itself might even be illegal.
Right,
And
that's true.
something potentially impeachable. But he's been a terrible president. But being terrible president, making bad decisions, a la Jimmy Carter, is not a reason to impeach somebody. I
Right,
never felt he
that's true.
deserved to merited impeachment,
Right.
but he made terrible decisions. Here, he's gone way beyond dereliction of duty and corruption. So yes.
All right, so
But again, I want to come back to something I said earlier. I would want to do it in an orderly, legal way.
Absolutely, okay.
Because we're a
That
nation
makes
of
sense.
laws. I
Of
want to
course.
operate in a dignified way. But my expectation is there's plenty enough out there to convict.
Well, I think you have enough probable cause
Yes.
for the indictment, at least, to vote for the impeachment. Now, there's two other people whose names keep coming up with impeachment. One is Merrick Garland. I mean, two things that he did. Well, more than two, but let's just take two things. One is he signed off on the search warrant at Donald Trump's home without an underlying crime. Now, to do a search warrant, you need probable cause, and you have to have a crime that's associated with it. To me, it looked like a fishing expedition. It's something that never should have been done. It wasn't warranted. Never before in the history of our country has a search warrant been performed at the house of a former president. By the opposing political party, mind you.
I know. No, it was certainly history was made there, but history was made about a year earlier. Remember when he okayed using the FBI to start pursuing and investigating people who had stood up at school board meetings.
Yes.
So he's been very partisan. He's hardly a statesman-like kind of attorney general. Can you imagine? By the way, can you imagine if he were on the Supreme Court? You had someone who was that partisan in terms of how he's approaching the law enforcement. So he's another person who, he's one of many reasons this administration needs to go and possibly be investigated. Impeachment, truthfully, it's the first time I've ever heard someone say he potentially is a candidate for impeachment, but certainly a candidate for investigation, before we take it to the next step.
Well, the other thing is, he's going to, I guess, have the final word in the Hunter Biden, because he's the head of the Department of Justice.
Well, I can guess how that's going to turn out.
Okay. I would bet it's going to be a plea deal, and so they can never investigate him again, and he's going to do time served or whatever it is, and they're going to give him something ridiculous like community service for 6 hours. But then there's the person McGorkas, not pronouncing his name correctly, but the guy who's in charge of Homeland Security.
Yeah,
Mayorkas, for allowing all these illegal immigrants into our country. What do you think of that?
Well, truthfully, I think it's Biden's decision. So ultimately, even though he's the Secretary of Homeland Security, I don't think he's making the final call on that one. So that one, I would say that's really the buck. On that one, the buck stops with Biden as opposed to the cabinet secretary.
Do you think that he should be removed from office?
Well, having said that, he's another guy that should be investigated.
Right.
People often ask me, do you think Fauci should be thrown in jail?
Right.
Or this guy or that guy? I say, remember, we are Americans. We don't just throw people in jail
exactly.
because of what we think they did. They need
Right.
to be properly investigated, have their right to an attorney. I know this takes a long time to do this. That's why people don't like it. But again, we want be a nation of laws, not a nation of mob rule.
I agree with
so
you.
we're going to do
Right.
these things in a very orderly, fair way, because among other things, that's the right way to do it. But also, it's
Absolutely.
more likely to stick if we do it the right way. So,
Right.
so all these people, Merrick Garland, Joe Biden, Mayorkas, Mr. Fauci,
Right.
or Dr. Fauci. I think they should all be investigated because there's a lot of probable cause that they've done wrong things.
Well, Fauci is retiring in the end of December.
Yes.
So I think one of the reasons for that is so that he doesn't have an issue when the Republicans take over in January. Because it certainly looks like there's going to be a red wave.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the polling that's coming out, the governor's poll has Governor DeSantis up by 12 points. Charlie Crist's chief strategist just was arrested for beating his wife, which, of course, he had to resign for. But
No, what they said was he was leaving for personal reasons, and then not long after they found
Well,
out what
that's what
a
the
very big
personal
personal
reason
reason.
was.
I
Right,
mean,
exactly.
terrible tragedy for that family. So maybe we
Right.
shouldn't be laughing about it, but it's pretty
But doesn't that tell
ironic.
you something about the character of the people that he hires?
Yes, sir.
right?
Yes,
I
sir.
mean, so that's not somebody, and he was once a failed governor in the state of Florida before I came to Florida, but from what I heard he didn't do a great job, didn't get reelected. Now he's running again. Why would we want him now?
He's one of those people that just career politicians that won't go away. And remember, he
Right.
was a Republican back when he was a
was.
failed governor. You
Right.
know the old joke, a Republican and an independent and a Democrat walk into a bar, and what does the bartender say? Hello, Mr. Christ.
Right,
You know?
right.
And we've heard that joke 100 times
Right,
about 100 people, but it's so true about him.
Right, no, it certainly is true about him. But what is your take, and I'm just going to ask you, on some of these Senate races that are close, Pennsylvania, Georgia, what's your take on those?
For a lot of these around the country, they thought they were slam dunks for Democrats in July and August. And what was hanging over all these was the abortion issue.
Right.
But interestingly, that has played out how I, by the way, predicted it would, which is over time people start to realize, wait a minute, this didn't make abortion illegal. It just left it in charge,
Right.
put the matter back to the states.
Right, exactly.
And that's what's happening in all these places. So that is very quickly fading as an issue that's helping the Democrats. So that's very much going to hurt Lois Frankel because she's building her entire campaign on one issue, and
Right.
in particular, a whole series of lies about my views on it.
Of course, right,
And
exactly.
so that's what's, I think, going to turn the tide in a lot of these.
Yep.
And people more and more are realizing, remember what Joe Carville said, the famous line? It's the economy, stupid.
That's correct.
And
Right.
and that's the people are finally starting to get it.
Right. And how come nobody talks about the fact that even Ruth Gator Ginsburg thought that it should be a states' right issue?
Yeah, she said it was judicial overreach.
Exactly what it was.
And she was predicting that a long time ago. So nobody should be surprised it got repealed. The only surprise is that it took 49 years.
Right.
That's the only surprise there.
Right. Right, exactly. So what do you think about the Senate race in Pennsylvania, which is an interesting race because the Democratic candidate had a stroke, and as a result of the stroke, can't seem to think clearly or communicate very well. And they're trying to spin that by really keeping him away from debates or anything like that. But anytime you see this guy on an interview, it's clear that he's not really mentally competent.
Look, I feel for this guy. I mean,
Yes.
I feel for anybody, especially he's a young man to have such a debilitating event in his life. So on a personal level, I feel very badly for him. But truthfully, he shouldn't be running.
Exactly.
He
He's
should not be
qualified.
running.
Yeah.
And I wish him. Listen, I wish him nothing but a speedy recovery from whatever he has. But he should not be running.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. Well, what are the thoughts do you have on the 2022 elections, which are just a couple of weeks away now?
Mike, I'm feeling really good about it.
Yeah.
You know, like
I'm feeling good for you.
We had polling a month ago that said I was already within single digits and within striking distance. That was before we started running
Yep.
my TV ads. And we're also bombarding on radio and all throughout the internet.
Excellent.
It's getting a tremendous response. I think the best report card we've gotten, better than even any poll,
Right.
was a week ago, Lois Frankel switching from being silent about me
Oh, yes.
to openly
Yes.
attacking me. And,
Yes.
and funny enough, we actually got a post the other day
Good.
on our Facebook page from someone who was a pro-choice person, but he said, she's just gone too far with this stuff. Good
Yes.
Lord, I'm voting
Right.
for you, Dan.
Exactly.
And I think there's a lot more of that's going to happen.
I
when
agree
people
with you.
realize, in fact, we've launched a new commercial today. We just played it earlier.
Commercial's great.
Makes the point that it's settled law in this state.
Right.
Why are we obsessing over this thing when we have multiple crises in our country that we need to address?
Yes.
People are getting that, and that's why I'm confident I'm going to win this race, Mike.
I am confident you're going to win it too. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show, to help put you over that finish line, because you're a great candidate. You're a great person. You got a great family. You got a terrific wife. You're just a great guy.
Well, thank you, Mike.
And you're competent.
That
and
helps.
you're competent.
That helps.
Okay? The fact that not only are you a good person, but you can do the job. And when that's what Congress is, it's a job interview. Who can do the best job? And if I look at your resume and I look at Lois Frankel's resume, I don't see much on her side of the ledger. But I've seen your side of the ledger. You took a church that was bankrupt and you brought it into prosperity again. You've done very well personally in your finances. You're a smart person. You've made money for yourself. You've gotten great endorsements. People like Dick Morris, who was a political advocate for years, signed on and got behind you. And I think that says a lot about you and your character.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to, see you make it, because I know that you do a great job in Congress for the people. So we have 3 minutes left in the show. In those 3 minutes, I'm going to allow you to talk about whatever you'd like, hit on whatever you want, so that, tell people how they, first of all, tell people how they can fund your campaign. That's number one. You need money. You need money to get these ads out there. You need money to reach the people with your message, because you have a great message. So tell our viewing audience how they can help you raise money.
Well, there's 3 ways to help me and all other candidates. Number 1, vote for me, of course.
Of course.
And make sure your friends vote. And I always tell everyone, we all need to be one big get out the vote machine. So we're actually now in early voting. So I keep telling everyone in the county, all right, tell everyone who you think is going to vote the Republican, get out and vote. And call them up today and say, have you voted yet? No. Call them up tomorrow. Have you voted yet? When they finally say, all right, I'll vote on Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, you call them up and say, did you vote yesterday?
Right.
We need to be relentless about that. If we get big turnout, that'll make a big difference. So everyone needs to vote and be part of the get out the vote machine. Number 2, volunteer on campaigns. There's so many different things you can do to help a campaign. And the biggest thing we have need for right now is people going door to door and knocking on their door. The best way to get someone to vote for you, knock on their door and ask them for the vote. So that's where we need the most help.
Okay.
Finally, we also need financial help. We're running TV ads. TV is extremely expensive. We were on cable for a while, which is a cheaper buy, but now we've gone to traditional broadcast TV, which is a different plateau in terms of pricing.
Right, exactly.
We've been able to do it because of the funding we've gotten it, but we need more funding to come in. So you could sign up for my campaign to volunteer or donate via my website. The easiest way to get there is to type in danforusa.com. That'll take you to my website.
Okay, danforusa.com.
Correct.
And it's F-O-R, right?
F-O-R or the number 4, either one works.
Either one
It'll
works,
take you
okay.
to the website.
Okay.
And the old joke is, what's the most important thing on a candidate's website? It's not their picture, it's the big red Donate Now button. And yes, it's at the top of every page. And listen, there is no tomorrow. I'm telling everybody, if you think you're
There
going
is
to
no
donate, do
tomorrow.
it right now as you're watching. Don't do it tomorrow. You might get distracted by something tomorrow. Do it now, because money you give me on November 7th is not going to help me. Money you give me now is going to go straight into TV ads and keep our message on the air, which I think is working, because Lois is clearly running scared, and it's working. So please help me do that.
Well, I think you got a great message. I'm going to give that information out one more time. danforusa.com. Help Dan. Dan, you've been great. I always enjoy having you on the show, and I want to thank you for appearing on the Political
Thanks,
Power
Mike.
Hour.
Always a
You're
pleasure.
welcome. You're welcome. And until next week, we'll see you again. I'm Mike Vilardi, the Political Power Hour. See you next week. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Political Power Hour with your host, Michael Vilardi. If you would like to see a particular candidate on our show, please email us at michaelvilardi@gmail.com. That's 1 L in Vilardi. We will see you next week.